Welcome back once again, ladies and gentlemen, to the Adventures in Historyland YouTube channel. Today, I, the host, am joined by another figure from the world of historical fiction. Those of you who watched the last video I did with an author, David Davies, about the French Navy in the French Revolution, will be delighted to have more content from creative authors who deal in historical stories. And today we have Salina Baker, who is the author of Angels and Patriots, which is a series set in the American Revolution, and is now soaring on the wings of angels, you might say, to speak of one of the American Revolution's great generals, who I think is one of the most talented generals of that war, and but whose life I don't know very much about, to be honest. Salina, your book is about General Nathaniel Greene, and it's great to have you here. The standard question. So, how did this idea come about to write about this guy?
He was a character in 3 of the 4 books of my historical fantasy series. And as I wrote about him and read more about him, including his wife, Katie, I became more and more fascinated with him, the type of person that he was and what he did in the American Revolution that most people, if you're not a Revolutionary War fan, have no idea who he was or what his importance was to the war and his life in general.
Mm-hmm. So you'd already had some familiarity with him, and you saw the opportunity to give him the full treatment. And like you
Yes,
say, Greene is not terribly well known unless you know about the American Revolution. I know a bit about his military record from reading about the American Revolution. He was commander in the South. People who know about him will know of his battles against Cornwallis, which is the big one at Guilford Courthouse. People may know he comes from, am I right, Quaker origins?
yes.
And
He
that's
was he
that's
was
a fascinating thing in itself.
yes. He was born in Rhode Island in 1742, and he was the 4th son of a Quaker preacher and successful businessman. And his father believed that book learning beyond reading, writing, and math would lead to temptation and sin. And Nathaniel Greene, being one of 8 boys, didn't like that. He was curious and wanted to know more about the world around him. And the Enlightenment was going on. He read a lot of John Locke, as a lot of people did then, military manuals. And he eventually rejected the formal doctrines of the Quaker religion when he was around 32.
Right. So fairly developed in life when he decided to make that decision.
Yes, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And did he choose the army, or is he one of these people who volunteered did he choose a military life, or did it sort of fall upon him?
It sort of fell upon him when they closed the ports in Boston in 1774. Rhode Island, Greenwich formed a militia company called the Kentish Guards, and Nathaniel Greene joined that company. He was a private. They would not promote him to officer because he had a limp,
Okay.
and they told him the limp was embarrassing and that we're not going to have you walking around like that,
Malicious
right?
stuff. Right. Right.
Militia, right? So at first he got huffy about it and felt mortified, and then he said, "I'll just stick with these guys." So when the first shots were fired of the American Revolution on April 19th, 1775, in Concord and Lexington, he his militia marched toward Massachusetts, and they got called back at the border. And a few days later, Rhode Island formed an army of observation. And out of all the men that were part of this army that they were forming, they picked Nathaniel Greene to be their general after he had been told he was an embarrassment.
That is quite a turnaround.
So he marched his army of observation to the siege of Boston, set up camp there, And that's how he basically got into the army.
Okay, and so as the commander in chief of the Army of Rhode Island, I guess, um, which just is one of those interesting things about that stage of the American Revolution, how all the states and territories kind of had their own little armies, and everybody was doing their own thing.
Right.
Is that how he meets George Washington?
Yes. Yes. Nathaniel misses the Battle of Bunker Hill because he goes back to Rhode Island to recruit. He comes back. Washington shows up a couple weeks later. And he sends a letter of introduction to Washington, and what they actually said to one another in the initial meeting is unknown. But yes, that's how he met Washington.
Right. And I mean, I know that they form a very close working relationship. Washington sees him as a very solid, intelligent, reliable officer. What is Greene like as a man, as a general even? What do you think of him?
He, first of all, he was very sensitive to criticism. He had asthma. He had a smallpox scar on his right eye that caused him constant eye infections. So he had these physical challenges that he was sensitive to already. He was very loyal. He worried a lot about his, not only his military family, but his wife and children, his extended family, his brothers. He was somewhat intemperate. Um, he tended to be pedantic when he wrote his letters, which is kind of endearing. On the other hand, they're exhausting. And he cared a lot about his men. That was very, very important to him.
This is definitely the impression I have of Greene. Um, he gets a little lost in the shuffle though. Amongst all the other sort of big Revolutionary War heroes. I think a lot of people confuse him with Daniel Morgan and Henry Knox. Um, maybe because the portraits are somewhat similar in some cases, but is 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 it just that he wasn't as dramatic as all the other ones that he gets
Um,
lost in the shuffle, or?
I'm not really sure. That's a good question. He was extremely close with Henry Knox and probably knew Henry Knox before the war, since he would go to Boston and buy books, and Knox was a bookseller in Boston. So there's a good chance they already knew one another before. Of course, if he gets mixed up with Daniel Morgan, that's because Morgan was, did the whole Cowpens thing,
Yeah.
and Greene sent him there. But I'm not sure. He seemed a little maybe more low profile, Henry Knox being the big artillery general, or Nathaniel Greene. During the war in the North, uh, he became quartermaster general. I think a lot of people don't realize that, or, kind of took him off the field
Mm.
more than he wanted.
Yeah.
He didn't like being quartermaster general at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is the problem when you get this is a problem for a lot of what you might call, generals who like to lead from the front kind of guys who are nevertheless gifted administrators and they're needed on high staff positions and things like that. So I can understand why people like Greene could get frustrated when they have to sort of just make sure everybody gets fed.
Yeah, yeah, and he was often very frustrated with Congress.
Mm,
He was not a politician. He didn't like the politics in Philadelphia. He complained about the endless committees, them changing their minds. It was a very frustrating time for him. However, Washington did give him field command a couple of times while he was quartermaster general, kind of soothed him over a little bit, but
mhm,
it was during the Battle of Rhode Island in August 1778 and Monmouth in June 1778.
mhm.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Make sure I have my
Uh,
dates right.
Well, I mean, no, I won't hold that against you if you get a date wrong here or there. I know you know your stuff. People get very antsy about that sort of stuff, but they really shouldn't. It's difficult to remember, the day, the week, the month, and the year for like a dozen different things.
Right, right.
But so you chose to tell his story through fiction. And that's a really powerful tool to both entertain and to educate in terms of who this person was, why he's important. What's it like? Because I presume that being a fantasy series, that some of the characters in your other series are fictional.
Yes, some of them are, but it's historically accurate,
Yeah,
authentic. So
yeah,
yes, there
I'm
are
sure.
some fictional characters in
Hmm.
that series.
So, was it challenging at all to basically take, the life of a real person and make that the sort of focus of a book? I imagine it to be quite a daunting thing to
It was
novelize a
very,
biography.
it was very, very daunting. The one thing I had a couple things on my side. I was used to doing heavy research on the Revolutionary War because of the series. I knew the people, or I knew a lot of the people, not all of them, of course. So I kind of had already read a lot of biographies on Knox, Washington, Lafayette, whatnot, Joseph Warren, all the names everybody knows.
Yes, Warren. Yeah, I've noticed
Yeah,
him crop up in the timeline.
he's he's the other love of my American Revolution life is Joseph Warren. Um, so at first I felt like to be honest to the audience, I felt like I had imposter syndrome writing
Mm,
about Nathaniel Greene because he's such a high profile hero of the war. But I settled in and I found a lot of primary resources, some of them online, some of them not. I contacted like the General Greene, Nathaniel Greene Homestead, and talked to them a little bit. Um, but as it went on, I began to feel more. So this is why I have a big picture behind me of him, so I could feel him when I'm
hmm
writing. So
hmm
yes, it was quite daunting to write this novel.
uh-huh. I think a lot of people will be excited about this because, you know, in terms of military fiction, in terms of historical fiction, I mean, the United States has a good cornered market on that sort of thing. We don't have a lot of that new authors around in England at the moment, but I would think that most of the limelight goes to the American Civil War in terms of fiction, and so a new book about an important figure, I think it will be very exciting to people.
I hope everyone will enjoy it.
Hmm.
I hope I did a good job talking about his life, his military life, his personal life.
Hmm.
Um, I tried to remain as historically accurate as possible without
Hmm.
making a lot of things up. But, conversation can sometimes be hard in these kind of novels
Yeah.
since they wrote a lot of letters to one another.
Hmm.
Um,
Uh, do you when you when you create conversations with characters, and obviously this must tie into how sort of daunting it is to write about a real person in this sense. When you have portions where you have to have a conversation with another person, do you like to um sort of go with a theme or a feeling that they need to express, or do you try and find out as much as possible about what they would have said?
um, Sort of both. I think finding out as much as possible about what they would have said is kind of a key. That's why I've read a lot of biographies on the people that are in the book that fought with Green in
Hmm.
the South and in the North, of course.
Hmm.
And there's a plethora of their letters and what they thought about things. So when there's conversations, I kind of was able to get the feeling between these people how they felt about one another.
Hmm. Did you find the general's voice? Do you sort of did you tap into it? Do you hear him in your head now?
Yes, it took it. That's a good question because it took me a while to do that. Even though he was in my series, he was one of 1,000 people in that series. I mean, because the
Hmm.
wars, there's lots of people fighting. He was one of many, many characters, but this was focused on him and on his wife, Katie. She
Hmm.
also has a point of view in the novel.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. You mentioned his wife. who, if people don't know about Nathaniel Greene, then they're probably not going to know about his wife. I mean, tell me a little bit about his family.
Uh, his wife Katie was the niece of one of his Nathaniel's distant relatives, and he met her there in Greenwich, Rhode Island, East Greenwich. She was 13 years younger than him. He was in love with some other woman named Nancy Ward. Well, he fell in love with Katie, and she was quite the convivial young woman. She went to camp, to winter cantonments, and the officers, Washington, loved her. She was close friends with Martha Washington and remained that way her entire life, well, until Martha died.
Hmm.
Katie died later. But Nathaniel married her. She waited for him. She had a bunch of kids with him. She'd go to camp. She'd come home. She was pregnant again. But the officers loved her. She
Hmm.
danced. She liked to drink wine. There were rumors about her and Anthony Wayne, General Anthony Wayne, that, yeah, I
Hmm. Sure.
not sure. I don't want to say she ever did anything because there's no
Quite.
proof of that.
Yeah.
And Nathaniel didn't believe it anyway.
Hmm.
But he cared a lot. He worried a lot. He wrote to her constantly.
Hmm. I do like a lot of the figures in the American Revolution for this fact that you have a lot of great correspondences back to their wives and things like that. And obviously, this is one of them. I applaud the stance on whether or not there was an affair at play. I think a lot of writers would be overly tempted to create something there. Uh, but I've always been of the opinion as well that, I mean, gossip is gossip. It's not really facts. It's just
Right.
they didn't know any more than we did.
Right. Yeah. People still felt the same way then about, you know, romance and whatever as then as they do now. The thing about Katie was when Nathaniel died in 1786 at age 43 from sunstroke in Savannah, Georgia. He
Hmm.
was awarded a plantation by the state of Georgia, and he and Katie moved to Mulberry Grove, which is the name of the plantation, in October 1785. And Nathaniel was in horrible debt.
Hmm.
He had clothed his Southern Army on pretty much a promissory note for 30,000 pounds. And he had no way to recover that money when the
Hmm.
creditors started hounding him for it.
Hmm.
So he died in crushing debt. When he died, Katie inherited this crushing debt. She managed to get the money from the Continental Congress several years later.
Hmm.
She helped Eli Whitney invent the cotton gin.
Right.
Yeah. So her life alone is a fascinating
Hmm.
life of a remarkable woman. She was
The
remarkable.
next novel,
Yeah, I know. I
what
thought
Katie
about
did
doing
next.
that. Right? I have too.
Wow, yeah, well, we'll have to look out for that. It could be too tempting to turn down, but we'll keep us posted on that.
I will.
Um, yeah, so the what has been your favorite part about writing the book?
I think the Southern campaign was probably my favorite part because I felt like even though it's quartermaster general, he started to come into his own, if you want to say it like that. Um, he when he went to the South, he became this person that was not being, he was still reporting to the Continental Congress, Washington, he still did those things. He wrote 10,000 million letters every day, but he was on his own down there.
Hmm.
And I could just feel his force and his energy when he was directing the Southern campaign.
Hmm. That is a seminal moment for Greene when he takes command of the Southern Army, and it was in a real state when he got it as well after Camden, and he fought that massive battle uh against Cornwallis. Yeah, yeah, I can. I can see I can I've always felt that he gets this job. It's a massive job, and he handles it incredibly well under the circumstances. And like you say, I mean, a lot of people don't realize that a lot of people ruined themselves by using their own money to finance the war effort, especially in the South.
Yes,
And Green, I mean, good grief! The guy was ill a lot. He was using his own money on his
yes,
soldiers. It must have gotten pretty dark for him out there alone, being chased around by Cornwallis. Um,
yes. There was
did
actually a time
Yeah.
when he thought about handing the army over to Baron von Steuben, who was in
Mm,
Virginia. And Steuben at the time, this was before Washington arrived, was Nathaniel Greene's distant second in command.
mhm,
Distant.
mhm,
When he had an adjutant general named Otho Holland Williams on site with him.
mhm,
But he got some pretty dark places there.
mhm. What do you think got him through?
I think that he was just that kind of a determined person. He literally said that he was going to save South Carolina or die. And
Mhm,
he said these kind of things. And a lot of those guys did back then. This was,
mm.
about honor. And he wanted to prove himself, and he did.
Is he is he as an inspiring guy as some of the other generals? Washington gets the reputation of being a particular type of leader. You get people like who are very demonstrative and who are very personable with their men and things like that. What sort of a general was he in that sense?
He was a little more distant than some of them as far as being very personal with his officers, and his men. But like I had said before, he cared a lot about what happened to them. So this was where a lot of his letters are constantly begging to clothe his men, to send hospital stores to, whatever else they needed, ammunition, whiskey, food, whatever it was. I think that he probably learned a lot of his command, the way he commanded from Washington.
Hmm.
Washington was a bit distant. Nathaniel Greene was a bit distant,
Hmm.
but his men loved him. And for instance, Colonel Light Horse Harry Lee was fighting for Greene in the South. He, of course, was in the North as well. When Light Horse Harry Lee left the army in March 1782, he was very full of self-pity and whatnot. But he told Nathaniel Greene that he would love him for the rest of his life, and he did.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
read a biography on him, and he went through with that he said he would love him
Hmm.
forever.
So he was a man who
Anthony
could inspire
did the
loyalty and
same.
affection. Yeah.
Yes. So even though he wasn't super, super close, he always called everyone my friend
Hmm.
when he was writing. And he was a good friend. Anthony Wayne called him an immaculate friend.
Yes, I saw the tweet a few days ago about was it Knox talking about it when he died?
Yeah, it was a
That was a very
letter,
touching thing.
very touching. Him writing to his old friend Henry Knox, and that was a few months before he died. Nathaniel died,
Mm.
and
Hmm.
he wrote that letter to him.
So great testimonies from the people who actually knew him and served with him.
Hmm.
I think I don't know that I've ever read like a grave personal criticism of Nathaniel Greene. Um, and do you anyway, do you think that the fact he was a Northern general was that another problem he faced when he was in the South?
Yeah, well, at first I don't know if it was so much it was a northern general, but that the situation in the South was different. They had a civil war going on down there.
Mm,
The militia was all over the place, and he was not a big lover of militia. So,
yeah.
and neither was Washington. So this is probably another thing that he
Mm,
picked up from Washington, and for good reason. The militia would tend to run off.
mhm.
Guilford Courthouse, wherever it was, they'd run off.
But at the very beginning of the war, you'd get like people, the Massachusetts Army, you might call it, the New England Army. You had people very suspicious of like getting the Virginian to command it. And
Yes,
I was
yeah.
wondering whether there was an opposite to that, where you have this Rhode Islander being sent down to command the Southern Army. And it's sort of like it is a very Washingtonian thing that he had to do, actually, in that sense. I was wondering if if he had any of Washington's troubles in the South.
Oh, he had a lot of troubles in the South. There was a general named Thomas Sumter, who was in command of the state South Carolina troops, and Nathaniel really didn't have any authority over him, but he bossed him around a lot, and Sumter pushed back a lot, and Sumter even handed over his commission to Nathaniel Greene, said, "I quit." And Nathaniel Greene's like, I can't take this. This is the governor, John Rutledge, gave you this command. You have to go to him and quit.
Hmm.
And he also clashed with Francis Marion, General Francis Marion, who was a South Carolina militia
Yeah.
general who did fight in the Continental Army early on. They also clashed, but Marion was much more cooperative. The funny thing is that when they first met each other, they couldn't understand each other because,
Really?
well, Nathaniel has this Rhode Island accent, I
Okay.
assume, and Francis Marion has this Southern accent with mixed with French, apparently.
Okay.
And they're like, I can't understand you guys.
I would love to
Kind
see
of
that.
cute.
Yeah. I would love to see that level of character detail in on TV, which
Yes.
everyone's American on TV and everyone's British. But
Well, and they both limped. Marion had like deformed ankles and knees, and Nathaniel had a limp.
right,
So they're like
what
meeting
was
each other, limping toward each other. Yeah.
why did why did Nathaniel have a limp?
No one knows why. It was worked in an iron forge, owned and operated an iron forge, and it could have been because of him working the trip hammer,
Yeah.
or he used to sneak out of his house at night when he was a teenager and go dancing, and he may have hurt his knee jumping up. They're not sure
Okay.
what.
Okay. Interesting though. Interesting. He's a very I can sense that he actually is a very good subject for a novel, actually, because you've got all these great personal sort of things you can pull on. Now, this may or may not be useful to put into the video or not. I feel I have to ask because I've gone down this road. He's a former Quaker. He's from Rhode Island. He's a Yankee. He ends up as a plantation owner in the South. What is the deal with that exactly? I mean, I believe Quakers are against slavery.
Yes,
He did reject he has rejected Quaker teachings, essentially. You said it when he was in his 30s, but
the formal, right,
yeah,
formal
but what
doctrines, but
is?
not God and all of
Oh
that.
yeah, sure, yeah. So what can you talk about his life as a plantation owner a little?
Yeah, he struggled with that. First of all, the plantation belonged to a loyalist, and he was totally against property that was confiscated from loyalists. That he thought they should get their property back when the war was over,
Okay.
if we won. Americans won, I should say.
Okay.
And
Sure.
sorry. And he the plantation he was gifted two plantations, one in South Carolina called Boone's Barony and another one in Georgia called Mulberry Grove. He protested about it because it was confiscated property, but he accepted it anyway because he has this horrible debt
Hmm.
that he doesn't know what he's going to do to get out of. He has a farmhouse in Rhode Island, but it's attached for debt. He's living on borrowed money from Robert Morse, the financier of the war, from Lafayette, from some friends of his. So he feels like he doesn't have a choice.
Hmm.
And it's not an excuse, it's
No,
the
no.
way he felt.
Yeah, absolutely.
He was criticized, especially in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, by the other Quakers for doing so. And they ran him through the ringer publicly about it, but he did it anyway.
Hmm.
Um, and when he died, all that stuff went to his wife. the
Right.
plantations, the slaves,
Hmm.
the whole thing.
Hmm.
And yeah, so
It's a fascinating kind of controversy in
yes,
his life then, which, because he died so young, is not really resolved one way or another. We don't really know what he would have been doing later in his life with that property, I guess.
yes,
Um,
that's true. Because he also owned an island off of Georgia called Cumberland Island, that he had invested in with borrowed money. But he was not looking for enslaved people to work Cumberland Island. He was actually looking for immigrants, and that's what I was talking about. We were talking about the Spanish governor that he went to
yes,
see.
yes.
That's why he went there,
All right.
to get someone to work Cumberland Island, the timber business there. And he
Mm-hmm.
was going to pay for these people to do this, but nothing ever happened with it when he was alive.
Mm-hmm.
But the good question about that too, Josh, is that he told people that he wasn't sure how enslaved people felt about the plantation they lived on, or the work they did,
Mm-hmm.
or how attached they were. And so he honestly thought about this. What do
Mm-hmm.
these people, how do these people feel?
Mm-hmm.
However, it was just a thought.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, he went through with this anyway.
Right. Yeah. I get the impression that Greene can't have really known a great deal about the plantation business when he took it on.
He
And
did not.
so, yeah, and so processing all these things about, okay, what do I feel about slavery? There's that. Okay, what do I feel about how these people feel about the land where they live? Uh, there's that. What are the economic ramifications for them if I just free them all? What's going to happen then? There's many things that a person who has no idea about how the plantation system works that would need to be taken into account. And I get the impression from what you said that Greene may have been going through a process of figuring that out. The
He
very fact that
was.
he's in this crushing debt, hopes this is a lifeline to get out of it, um, suggests that, I don't know, he's maybe not the best businessman in the world, um, and is just trying to get out of this hole. And of course, he dies really before he can rectify any of this
Hmm.
and come to either what are essentially a political decision about whether I want to be a southern landowner, or sell up once I paid off my debts and do
And
something
once the
else.
market was better, and this is true, he was pushed into this, and he didn't know his. He had so much bad luck. The plantation in South Carolina, he had an overseer, and the overseer kept sending him bills for more enslaved people, more horses, more corn and rice, whatever, for the crops. There was a hurricane. Um, it was just this, every time he turned around, it was something horrible happening.
Yeah. The thing is, I mean, you need to be quite rich to run a plantation, uh, even without the revenue that comes from it.
Hmm.
Really, they're landed estates, which is why the Southern gentry tried to keep a hold of them. Uh,
That's why they called them the Rice Kings,
yeah,
right? It was,
exactly.
yeah.
So, um, there could have been a poison chalice, and it sort of shows it's just a very interesting twist to his life that this is the lifeline he got given to try and get out of debt.
I think
Um,
it is too.
and obviously it's a tragic end for him, at the end of a very what would you call it, what would you call it, impressive life.
Hmm.
um but he does stand there in that portrait there, and which I've always thought was a very characterful portrait. I think it seems to sort of show something about the man. And so tell me a little bit about the book then, just so we can wrap it up, to let the people know. We'll return to the book, let people know what they're looking at here. Is it his entire life?
Yes, it basically starts when he's 28. Their iron forge burns down in 1772. Yeah, 1772. But it looks back, flashes back to his childhood somewhat.
Hmm.
Uh, so yes, and it covers his entire life forward since his childhood was there's not a whole lot known about it. It's kind of more discussions with him and his brothers about, when we were kids, blah blah blah. Um, he had a lot of brothers, so they spent a lot of time doing boy things and working on their dad's farm and in the mills. And they had a ship together called the Fortune that got confiscated by the Royal Navy and led to the burning of the Gaspee.
Ah.
Um, it was one of
Hmm.
the things that led to the burning of the Gaspee in June of 1772. But yes, the book covers his
Hmm.
life and the war, and hopefully there's some things in there that people have not read about Greene
Hmm.
that will kind of be hopefully surprise or just
Yeah.
something new. Hey, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about it. It's very long,
Hmm.
um, but
Well, there's
I've
nothing wrong
got all
with a
my
long.
resources. If you need any, there's plenty.
Absolutely. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a long book, um, and uh, when you have a particular subject, you want it to be a long book. To be honest, the tyranny of the 300-page novel would probably not suit Green very well.
No, it
These
would
big
not
figures,
because
you know.
yes, because he did so many different things.
Hmm.
It wasn't just, I mean, he was a general, but he was also quartermaster.
Hmm.
Uh, he was a father,
Hmm.
husband, a friend.
Hmm.
Um, he worried about everything.
Yeah. You heard about
And
everything.
yes, the war in the South was a huge part
Yeah.
of the book.
Yes. Absolutely. I'm sure that will be the the crux of sort of the crux of it. But so we won't give too much away on that score and how you do things and how you've done it and how you've teased out this and that because people need to read the book. Out of curiosity's sake, and it's kind of a hackneyed thing to ask authors, but have you thought have you thought that if this was ever turned into a movie, who would play Nathaniel Greene?
Actually, this is funny you asked me because I belong to a group called the Historical Writers Forum. And sometimes we ask each other questions like that. And I couldn't think of anybody at first. I thought, well, maybe Tom Hiddleston might,
Hmm.
but I couldn't. That's all I could come up with at the time. So
You'd have to gain a bit of weight, but yeah, there's something there. Yeah.
might be. He's not too old.
Uh-huh.
So, they tend to make some of these generals look like they're a bunch of old guys,
This is true.
and they're not.
Mhm. It's
They
the
weren't
wig,
old.
it's the wig and the powdered hair.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's it, right?
It
Exactly.
gives them a little bit of an accent. It ages them a little bit.
Yeah,
But
right.
anyway, no, Selena, that's great to hear. I'm very glad to hear that you've successfully gone on this journey, found Nathaniel Greene and told his story, and looking forward to hearing more about it. Hopefully, I'll get to read it when it comes out. And until that time, ladies and gentlemen, there'll be lots of nice links below the below this video in the box where you can go to check out what Selena has written. Keep updated with the book. You'll be able to follow Selena on Twitter. With the links below, and I'll put a little thing on the screen here if you want to go over it and follow her on Twitter. Lots of content about Greene and Warren and her books there if you are interested in buying the book and keeping updated on that. Sina, thank you so much for coming to Historyland today.
Thank you, Josh. I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Yeah, my absolute pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, if you liked this video, please like and subscribe on the way out the door. And I will see you all again for another adventure in Historyland. Thank you for watching.